There's two sides to every story. The defeat of the pain of the glory. It all burns away. But how did it go so wrong? Now it's all gone.
Survival horror, a genre that has lost its original definition to most modern-day gamers. Let's go all the way back to the 1990s. Director Shinji Mikami was tasked with remaking one of Capcom's earlier titles called Sweet Home. However, the project strayed so far away from the game it was supposed to be remaking, it became its own entity. And thus, Biohazard was born. However, a band with the same name was active during the 90s in the US, and not wanting to get into any copyright trouble, there had to be a new name for the game. After a company vote, Biohazard would go on to be known as
Resident Evil.
On March 22nd, 1996, Resident Evil released on the original PlayStation. Its unique design would lead to it creating an entirely new video game genre, survival horror. Not only was it simply unique, but it was goddamn enjoyable. Now before I get into the review, feast your eyes on this. Yep, this is the gameplay I'm using. I know, it's shitty, but I only own this game on the PS Vita and I don't have a capture card, OBS, or PC. So, this is the best I got. Sorry we're going back to 2009 YouTube, but just bear with me. Now I know you can't really admire this game's beauty through a compressed cam footage, but take my word for it. For a game that came out in 1996, this looks remarkable. Granted, this is the director's cut of the game ported to the Vita, but it's still mostly what the original looked like. The in-game models are standard for PS1, but the environments themselves are great. A lot of you may already know what that is, but I like to hear myself talk, so I'll explain it anyways. In order to save on assets and disk space, the backgrounds of each area are actually pre-rendered images. This wasn't an uncommon practice for games in this generation. Other games like Grim Fandango also did this to good effect, but Resident Evil does it so perfectly. As for the environment itself, the game takes place inside of a large, luxurious mansion. While most of the rooms are empty and lack much detail in its design, this game is the first of its kind, so I can excuse that. The game also has fixed camera angles as your POV, and while some may not be used to it, I personally miss fixed camera angles. What can I say? They look cool, and it's just a fun way to experience a game. And as for the soundtrack, here's where it gets complicated. See, I played the director's cut, which has an entirely different soundtrack from the original. But I can't confidently say that I'm a fan of director's cut's soundtrack. It's atmospheric, haunting, and definitely sets the mood. But let's not talk about that mansion basement theme. Another iconic thing about this game is the voice acting. Yeah, it's something.
Jill, so you're safe.
That's what I was going to say.
Story has it that Capcom put aside any English voice actors who they could find in Japan, some of these people not even being voice actors, and this led to Resident Evil having the most infamously bad voice acting in any video game. However, that honestly adds to the charm of this game, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm always excited for the next cutscene just so I can hear more of this horrendous voice acting. Now actually getting into gameplay, what about Resident Evil makes it so different? Well, in Resident Evil, you are tasked with finding your way out of the mansion, which requires a whole lot of exploration and puzzle solving. However, all types of monsters lurk in almost every room, so you have to be armed to take out these threats. But a lot of your resources are highly limited, so combat is ultimately something you want to avoid. Pile that on with a strict number of inventory slots that results in strategic item management, and you have yourself a survival horror game. Now, enough about what survival horror is this a fun game? Definitely. There's a strange sense of satisfaction when you unlock a new area of the mansion or finally figure out a certain puzzle that rewards you with key items or more resources you can use to defend yourself. A lot of these puzzles aren't super obvious, but they aren't brain scratchers either, so you should figure them out relatively quickly. While the limitations on ammo resources might not sound fun, on the contrary, it adds an entire additional layer to the game. Carefully deciding what fights to avoid, choosing what weapon is the best one to use in a certain situation, and desperately scouting for more ammo or healing items is really what makes this game for me. The reason Resident Evil was so revolutionary is because at the time, games with optional combat that was this in-depth simply did not exist. And don't get me started on your arsenal of weapons. You have the regular Beretta, which is a pistol best used on regular enemies, the shotgun, which is the most reliable high-damage weapon since shotgun shells aren't too rare, the bazooka, which is best used for boss encounters, and the Magnum, which is a super high-powered weapon best reserved for the final boss. While the original Resident Evil understandably has the weakest weapon selection out of the entire series, I love how each of the 4 weapons are different from one another and play certain roles throughout the game. While we're still on the subject of gameplay, I gotta mention the tank controls. It's a popular myth that Shinji Mikami chose this game to have tank controls so the slower movement would make it scarier. While that would have been cool, it actually turns out that he chose tank controls simply because he thought it would be the best type of controls to have for the game, and not only that, but it wasn't too uncommon for games to have tank controls around this time. I don't mind tank controls, and it's definitely easy to get used to after a while. Another thing worth talking about is the enemy variety, something else Resident Evil is well known for. The standard enemies are zombies and they definitely serve their purpose. They're walking, shambling corpses that will get the jump on you if you underestimate them, and can either be mowed down with bullets or swiftly avoided. You have canines, zombie dogs that are nearly impossible to hit and are best to run away from. After that there's the spiders, which are just giant man-eating spiders. I have serious arachnophobia, so let's move on. After that are the hunters. These fuckers. They are fast, vicious, and will kill you if you are not prepared. And lastly, we have the chimeras. These disgusting things only appear briefly in one room, but man are they not to be played with. While they're not as vicious as the hunters, their ability to climb on walls makes them harder to hit, and they can very well do a good amount of damage. I love the enemy variety. The hunters and chimeras in particular have great unique designs, and all 4 of the monsters differ greatly in terms of movement and threat level. Especially the hunters. Once they make an appearance, shit gets real. Going over the boss fights, there's Yawn, a giant-ass snake. Plant 42, a giant-ass plant that can be cheesed if you successfully create the V-Jolt, and the Tyrant, a giant-ass thing. Now these boss fights are not complex by any means. They play simple and all you have to do is just shoot them, but they're nice for breaking up the pacing, and they look pretty cool. The last thing I'll say about the gameplay is the replayability. There are plenty of reasons to replay this game, whether it be to beat your personal time, unlock a different ending, which there are multiple of, play as a different character, or to unlock special weapons such as the Infinite Rocket Launcher, an iconic unlockable weapon that has since become a staple of the franchise. Having good replayability helps make the game worth revisiting, and that's what I'll definitely be doing at some point. As for the story of the game, it's pretty simple. After a long string of random cannibalistic murders, a private task force named STARS for short are sent to the forest to investigate. After the Bravo team goes missing, the Alpha team are sent in to look for them when they're attacked by a bunch of undead mutts. Brad Vickers, the pilot, leaves the team behind and they take refuge inside a seemingly abandoned mansion. But after the group is separated, it's up to you to locate them and figure a way out of here. One side note is this game uses live action cutscenes for the intro and multiple endings it has, and I don't know, I just really like that for some reason. While I don't mind CG or even endgame cutscenes, something about live action just hits right. Going over to the characters, I love all of them. They each have different personalities and stand out from one another. Jill is cautious, determined, and pretty smart. Chris is super courageous, but doesn't think things through like his fellow Alpha team members do. Barry is the most lovable character in the game simply because he lends you a lot of support in Jill's playthrough and he has the most memorable lines.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
There's also Rebecca, a member of Bravo team who may not be as experienced as everyone else but has a heroic heart and bails Chris out more than once. And finally there's Kresker, the cool, calm, level-headed leader of the bunch. These 5 are the heart of the game's story, and you just can't help but love them. Now as you play through the game, you uncover multiple files that tells you the story behind the mansion and what really went on here. You learn a lot of critical information that's told to you from the perspective of different scientists and employees. It gives you an idea of the bigger picture beyond this one mansion. The lore behind this game is actually really well thought out, and it gives the player some satisfying explanations to some of their questions. There's also an interesting mystery of a traitor looking somewhere in STARS, and it's revealed to be Wesker, your own captain. He intends to awaken the Tyrant, betray Umbrella, and burn this mansion to the ground, but he's stopped by either Barry or the Tyrant. As I mentioned before, there's multiple endings. There's instances where you can get your side character killed or lead the other playable character to die if you don't collect 3 ammo discs. The tone of the ending will differ depending on what you choose, with the lone survivor ending being the saddest and the ending where you reunite with all of your buds being satisfying and thrilling. And that final moment on the helipad where you blow the tyrant sky high is always satisfying as hell. So that's Resident Evil. Oh, what a game. All these years later, it's still remembered for a very good reason. The decisions it made regarding presentation paid off, the gameplay was tense and unlike anything that came before it, and the story was sure as hell memorable. I loved this game. Small mishaps like the lack of details in rooms are not important, and the awful voice acting is something most people enjoy, even if it wasn't intentional. After playing all of these sequels and remakes, going back and experiencing the original was a great feeling. Resident Evil was unlike anything anyone had seen before, and the things it got right was a result of well-placed ambition. Resident Evil is a classic and it deserves to stay that way. But little did fans of it in 1996 know that this beloved game was only the beginning of something much bigger.